We're going to start off. This is not a Tableau infomercial, although it's heavily focused on Tableau because that's our main software we use for customized visualizations in the CalServe and VectorServe gateway. So today we'll be talking a lot about Tableau. There are options for other software. So during the course of today's session, we'll also cover how you can connect with other software. So if you do not have Tableau, don't worry. If you're thinking about getting Tableau too, this is an opportunity to see what you could do. So I will share my screen. What I wanted to do is start with a very brief video from Tableau, just explaining what Tableau is. And this is for those of you who haven't used Tableau before. It's very short, as you can see, 2 minutes and 16 seconds. So this is just a quick high-level overview of what Tableau does. And then we'll be right back and go through the detailed content of how you can use it with the VectorServe gateway.
Tableau empowers everyone to see and understand their data. It's business intelligence for your entire organization. Explore and analyze data in seconds. Just drag and drop to discover trends and outliers. Or use natural language to go from question to answer in an instant. Connect to the data you care about, whether it's a spreadsheet, database, or big data. Access data warehouses or cloud data. Tableau Prep helps you quickly and confidently transform and shape your data for analysis. Easily combine data from multiple sources. See all your data at a glance with Prep Builder's visual and direct interface. Smart grouping algorithms make it easy to reorganize your data. Then, publish and schedule your flows with Prep Conductor. Or open the output directly in Tableau Desktop for analysis, where you can ask questions, change your perspective, and reveal deeper meaning. Transform your data into powerful interactive dashboards. Securely share your data and dashboards with Tableau Online or Tableau Server, so everyone in your organization can ask and answer their own questions, right from a browser, tablet, or phone. Whether you want a fully hosted solution like Tableau Online, or to manage your own Tableau server on premises or in the cloud, the choice is yours. Everyone in your organization can access data and dashboards to explore and find their own insights in a trusted and secure environment. Tableau's management tools give you control over everything, from user permissions to data source connectivity, and the visibility you need to support your deployment. Tableau naturally fits within the fabric of your business, so you can easily scale from small teams to full organizations with thousands of users. Tableau. See and understand your data.
That was a big picture overview of Tableau. Obviously, every time I watch those videos, it's very business focused, which is not exactly what we're doing in public health and vector control. So clearly there's a bit of mismatch there, but a lot of commonalities too, where we have spatial locations, we have graphs, all of these dynamic things we need to do with data in real time throughout a surveillance season. And essentially that's what Tableau allows, is for you to customize your own views. A lot of you do board reports. You may also want to have certain reports that you provide to your public or other people who make control decisions in your agencies, and Tableau lets you do that in a way that's unique to your needs. So it's a little confusing at first to figure out how all these data sources come together, and they give you a lot of pretty pictures and videos to show you how you can integrate those flows, but there's a lot to know. So today's session is going to be a start on what may be a longer conversation, we hope, with many of you. Anyone who wants to be part of a working group on the Visual Gateway, we'd be happy to have you. I was talking with Dan Fisher at Sacchiolo and Peter and others, and I think there's the feeling that there hasn't been as much uptake of this as there could have been so far. Some of you are power users, and you'll hear from a number of agencies today who are using Tableau in their operations, but it's a relatively affordable way to, I think, make better decisions. So we'll talk through some of that. There are essentially two products involved in Tableau. There's a starting point is Tableau Server, And you heard some mention in the video of what you can do on servers with data. Of course, our vector serve gateway is on a server. We have a database behind the vector serve gateway that houses all of the data. And the way we're using Tableau is really to interface with that data set. So we've packaged the data in certain ways that are pretty user friendly. And essentially all you're doing at that point is connecting Tableau into those data to take advantage of them. So they very much mimic what you get when you do data exports from the gateway, with the advantage that instead of a static export that you get whenever you export it, they're a real-time view of your data. So as the data are entered into our system, you could have those reports right away that always have the latest data at any given point in time. And then the second product, in addition to Tableau Server, is Tableau Desktop. And that is, it just adds a little bit of cost. It essentially, Tableau Server has a baseline cost, and then if you want to add on desktop, you get server and desktop together as what they call a creator license. The reason Tableau calls that a creator license is because desktop is primarily for those people who are authoring the reports in your agency. So server has some capabilities to do that, but certainly if you want to go deeper, or if you want to provide your own spatial data and do lots of customization, you're going to need desktop. So a number of you already have desktop licenses with us, but that makes your data even more useful. I've already, in preparing for this webinar, I'm not the biggest power user of Tableau by any stretch, but in trying to create different data for this webinar, I quickly ran into the need for desktop. So I'll explain a bit about that as we go. Some examples of things that can't be done on server alone are relative date ranges. Dan mentioned that one to me yesterday, where if you want to always have a sliding date range that, for example, is 30 days back from the present day, and have that move with you, that's something that desktop offers. Server does not have that customization capability. Another example is authoring spatial data sources. So we have some of those in our vector serve gateway for you to use. But if you're going to use spatial zones or some other spatial files like shape files, KML files that you want to upload to our server and make use of, you have to do that through Tableau Desktop, which then allows you to create those data sources on our server. We'll talk through how that works and how you can set permissions and all of those good things. So those are just a couple of examples of very specific things that are very useful, but you can't do that with server alone. The way our licensing works is that we are not adding any money to what Tableau charges. The advantage of Tableau server or desktop through us is that we get the academic pricing. So if you go online and just look up Tableau pricing, they give a street price for Tableau. I think that's what they would charge your agency if you bought it directly, which you would be welcome to do. If you purchase it through us, you get something like a 20 or 30% discount, which is what Tableau provides to academic institutions like UC Davis. They are aware of what we're doing, so it's not cheating the system in any way. Essentially, we're hosting a Tableau server instance, and you are our user community. So what we do is just pass on the Tableau charges to your agency, which gives you a better deal, and then allows us to take advantage of that academic pricing. The one thing to know, though, is if you're in a county, for example, and there are broader needs than vector control in your county, the one thing that gets Tableau a little out of sorts, and it happened this past year, is if you decide to go through us for all of your Tableau licensing at your county, for example, and then Tableau finds out that you're somehow using a UC Davis deal to purchase all of your county licensing, they don't like that, obviously. This is really intended for our vector control audience. So if you're buying a dozen licenses to Tableau, if what happened last year, for example, is that a certain county bought a dozen licenses or so with us and then told their Tableau sales rep that they didn't really need that anymore because they were going with this UC Davis deal. And the Tableau sales rep then says, well, what is this UC Davis deal? So And then back comes the other Tableau salesperson who deals with UC to us saying, what are you doing? So I think they're perfectly fine as long as we're using it for purposes of vector control. If you've got a handful of licenses you need for your staff, that's exactly the way it should work. So in the next weeks, we will be inquiring with you about your licensing needs, and our license year runs probably in sync with most of your fiscal years, which is July 1st through June 30th. Jody or I will be sending out an email very shortly just to inquire about who wants a license for the next year. The price for server only per user seat, so that's per login, is $300 a year. And then it's $600 if you want the server seat plus the desktop. So that's essentially the two products in one so that you get all of the capabilities. I believe they still throw in Prep as well, which is it's a piece of software that's meant for cleaning and massaging data into a format for analysis. So you can decide whether that's useful to you. It's particularly useful for those of you who have a pile of historical data, for example, and there's lots of variance. For example, if you took text in a certain column, you could go back and massage that so that it's all consistent throughout history with Prep. So that's a separate piece of software. At least as of some months ago, they were still including that with the Tableau package. Okay, so we've got essentially three data types that you might think about using with Tableau. So we'll be going through some of those and giving examples of those today. One of which is the vector serve gateway data themselves. So that's pretty obvious. You can connect to data that are related to your surveillance or your control program, for example. There potentially could be other data on our server that you have provided. So there's a way with Tableau Desktop and even with server for certain data types like spreadsheets that you can upload your own data and put it on our server essentially, so that then you can connect it to gateway data as long as there's an identifier that links those. And then you could also potentially have your local data that never come to our server. So 3 different sources of data that you could work with. If you're dealing purely with local data that never move onto our server, that would be a case where you would need desktop, because desktop is going to work both with the local sources and the server sources and marry those two, but that's going to be only visible to whoever has that desktop license. So that has some limitations that server overcomes with the sharing capabilities. All right, so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jody, who will tell you a bit about how to connect to the server if you haven't done so already.
The way we have the server set up is that you can connect any kind of software to your data. And so I will show in using Power BI. This one. Okay. So this is Power BI, so if you're going to use this to connect to the data, so you need Power BI Desktop and not the web app version, so you can use this Get Data option and go down to More Sources. So your data is stored in Postgres database. That's what the gateway uses to connect to everything. So you would scroll down to here, find PostgreSQL database. So anything that can connect to a database can use this information to connect. So you would email us at help@vectorserve.org to find out your exact account details. So you don't have to write all this stuff down as I'm going through this, but I'm just showing you how you can connect your data, your software to the data that you have housed in the gateway. So once you connect, oh, I just connected. So you would put in the information that we send you after you email us, and you connect to the gateway, and all of your data is stored under reports. And so if you were looking for mosquito collection data, you could pull up this information, the pool information or the test results. And then we have some extra, mosquito pesticide applications. And then we have some informational tables here, just in case you want to join any of that kind of information up with your data. And like Chris said, with Tableau, you can use these data connections and join it up with just about anything. I mean, I've joined up this data in Tableau with pool test results with shape files that I downloaded from the Census Bureau. If you were going to use Tableau, our Tableau server is hosted at reports.vectorserve.org. As Chris mentioned, so we have to, in order to get access to this, we have to have a license per user. I suppose it's possible for agencies to share one account, but it should be only one. You would have to rotate who can use it at a time. So if you have multiple people needing to use it, you would need multiple seats. So once you connect, you would get assigned a folder for your agency. And then we have some shared folders here that you can, we share some certain templates that if you load them up, you can actually just load in your agency's data. So you don't actually have to create all the reports from scratch. You can borrow reports that other people use. And depending on how you people want to collaborate with each other, you could share your report, let someone else know about it. They could take your report. A good one is, well, we stored that under here. This is one made by Placer, and you could take, this is, I believe Joel uses this as to get a general overview of his agency, and you can look at his report using your data, and so you don't actually have to create these from scratch. So that's another aspect we're trying to highlight with it by using our Tableau server.
So there's really two steps, and this repeats some of what Jody said, where you need to, if you're going to go on our Tableau server instance, you go to reports.vectorserve.org and you type in your username and password, and that gets you past the gate for the Tableau server. The next piece to actually connect to our gateway data is your agency code and your agency password to access your agency's data. So those two steps are necessary to make it complete. I think that will become familiar after a couple of times using the system. So it's not a big deal. Even I've learned how to do it, even though I'm not very fresh on that until about this week. So not too hard, but there's a couple of steps involved. And then it's important to have that user group structure, because your permissions, if you create data sources that or worksheets or any other thing that you want to share with the other members of your agency, you can decide whether to share that to all users of the Tableau server, or you can share that only with members of your agency, or you just keep it to yourself. So it's completely up to you how you share things, and we'll go through how to set those permissions later. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again. So I'm going to go back and do what Jody did, which is just start with reports.vectorserve.org. If I can get my Zoom window out of the way, I'm going to sign out just so I'm starting fresh here. And then for the webinar, Jody, let me just use this user@vectorserve.org login. Okay, and when you first log in, you come usually to this type of page where it's seeing a little of everyone's reports. So it's got folders for each agency who's participating in this program. They have chosen to share these. So if I don't have permission to see these, I wouldn't see them, but these are the top level folders. And then as you descend into these, just for example, for Coachella, you can see when I go into their folder, I see a variety of different reports. So these are worksheets. You can see by the little icons that there's folders. So these are folders of more worksheets potentially, or dashboards or whatever they've created. And then these other icons indicate that these are direct views of data. Let's go into one of these. And so here's 2 reports that Kim has created. I won't go through Kim's reports because we'll hear from Kim later, actually. So you can favorite some of those. There's all sorts of things you can do here, sorting, the usual types of options you might expect. Because for this webinar purpose, I'm acting as if I'm a member of Sacramento YOLO, which keeps consistent with our other webinars. Here's an example of that. You can see that Dan Fisher, whom we'll also hear from later, is the owner of that folder. So he manages the contents of the folder, would have the ability to edit permissions and do all those types of things on behalf of his agency. And there could also be other users within SacYOLO like myself for the purposes of the webinar. So that's how the interface works. If I click on any particular report, so I'm just going to click this abundance anomaly. Here we have the different tabs or sheets within that worksheet. So you can see based on views, which is very useful to know which ones are the most used in the agency. So here I'll just sort by views, and what you see is, okay, this one's been viewed 21 times by somebody, and then the next one's been viewed 9 times, and clearly these others down here that have generic names probably are something someone started and didn't finish, something like that, so that happens a lot too. If I click on Dan, then I get the ones Dan has created. So here's where maybe this gets even a little more interesting. Dan, don't worry, I'm not going to present your material, but you can see that there's some that have been viewed a lot. So that means that agency is using those a lot. If I want to click into one, I'm going to try to sidestep anything Dan might present. So apologies, Dan, if it still doesn't achieve that. This is where I would need to type in my agency code, in this case, SAYO for SacYOLO. I need the agency password. So connect with us if you need to know your agency's password, and then click sign in. Oh, this is.
Yeah, I got that error this morning, Chris. You might want to try a different one.
Well, it's fixable. So what that is, and a number of you may experience that, is that we changed from CalServe to VectorServe. So anything that's been created, let's see, I don't have the ability to edit that. So yeah, you're right. Do you have a suggestion, Dan, for one that is better?
Service requests might work.
Okay. Trying.
You're in internal stuff. Service request, yeah, any of them.
Can sense your nervousness. Okay. All right.
You're clearly the admin because this is internal data you're not supposed to see.
No, actually, I'm not an admin.
Oh.
So I don't know. We can figure that out afterwards. So maybe some permissions need to be changed on this. But anyway, this is just viewing service requests as tabular data. Again, I won't steal Dan's thunder in this regard because he'll be showing you some of this later. But there's some options here for things you can filter, and then options for seeing the data in different ways. So
you go ahead and click on map. I'm not going to show this one.
Okay, SR map. So you can see the tabs let you see different aspects of the data that have been defined by Dan and potentially others in the agency if there are more. And so this is a set of points where service requests happen, presumably. Dan, do you want to explain this?
I believe that, so we get data from service requests of people can check a box if it's a day biting mosquito or not. But for some reason in in map vision, you can't filter that data on the map. And so we created a map so we could filter for requests that were day biting because we've got an 80s crew that goes and inspects those specifically.
Okay, and if I understood you correctly, this is map vision data that you've connected, right?
Yes, but that's not available to everybody.
Okay, exactly. So if you have local data sources, there are ways. You either have to have it served, as Dan is probably doing, from a database at SacYOLO, or you have to have it reachable by other means, like either uploading it to the server or putting it on some sort of cloud service that then Tableau can connect to.
Yeah, we export it into what's called a Tableau extract, which lets us publish it to the server, and then we can make these reports available to anyone over the web.
Okay, perfect. So All right, that's a brief view of the system. There's a lot to look at here, and clearly you can see just at a glance how many workbooks and views and data sources have been defined by the different agencies. So data sources are one that I think is particularly a low-hanging fruit for some of you to take advantage of if you have other data sources that you want to connect, because clearly there's not a lot happening at the moment. Some of those can be web-based, some of them can be just you uploading the data. So you get just a dashboard view of how much stuff is in there. If I go, for example, to, let's take Santa Cruz County, and I want to look at Santa Cruz County's reports that they've shared, I can do that. Let's just pick one that they look at a lot. Now the difference is, so I'm seeing Santa Cruz County's report, and let's see how this works, because what you should see if this all marries properly is that their report is defined using their formatting preferences, and this says Agency Santa Cruz. It's got all their customization. However, it's populated with Saciolo's data. And actually, they may have shared their own data too. So it looks like they've actually provided. So it is populated also with Santa Cruz's data here. But you can do this for any data set essentially. So if you're in one mosquito control agency and you want to check out a report created by another mosquito control agency, you can do that. And essentially, you'll see your data populating their reports. Here's an example, going back through the years and looking at how many of different species were found, so you can get a quick glance seasonality. Lots of things you can do with these reports, marrying the maps as well as the graphs. And then you can click on things and ask questions to isolate certain data points and figure out what was happening at that time.
Real quick, Chris, there is a way to basically embed the user name and password, which is just a speed thing, so you don't have to enter it every time you access the report. So it's possible that's what they did there. So it won't prompt you for your group name and password every time. So you can set it that way, or you can set it to have it prompt every time.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's something you want to consider, whether you want your data essentially available to everybody where they can open up your workbook and they can see your data, or do you want them to have to be able to enter credentials to populate it with their own data? So I think you're exactly right, Peter, that Santa Cruz's were embedded there and saved so that I can go straight there. Just for the purposes of this webinar, I wanted to just familiarize you with how you might start with data. So this is just a very quick overview. So here's the view of what my user has created, which is not a lot. That's one reason I don't know that much about every detail here, but these are my different workbooks. This Mosquito Collections and Pools workbook has a number of sheets within it. So these are different views of the data. I have two data sources defined. So one of those is derived from the gateway data. So the db.vectorserve.org source is my mosquito pool information. And then I have subdivisions of Sacramento and Yolo counties, which I uploaded from a shapefile. So that has to be done from desktop at the moment with spatial files, but works great when that happens. So what I might want to do is go in and edit this workbook. So this will show you how you would interact on server with the data. I did not embed the password. So this means that every time I access this, I'll need to type this. It is a bit of a nuisance, as Peter pointed out. So you can go ahead and embed it. Just know that if you embed it in the report, then other people can just launch that and it goes straight in. If you have this problem, which sometimes I do, like you just refresh the data source, it usually populates. There we go. So what I did here is create a map. In this case, this is just showing, I took those county subdivisions for Sacramento and Yolo counties. Those are just big chunks of the county that I'm using to mimic something like zones within your district operations. I loaded those into the system so that they're available. So you can see two data sources, one of which is the mosquito pools and one of which is those county subdivisions. Either are available for me to use on this report. So here, when I click on subdivisions, I'm seeing two aspects of the data. I'm seeing dimensions, which are essentially the ways you'd want to group your data. These are not the response variables. These are the ones that you use to stratify the response variables. So in this case, it grabs sub-county, for example, and then a lot of times it'll grab whatever text fields are in the data. So this is often a very long list for big tables. And then for measures, that's where the responses come in. So this is what you're interested in analyzing. It also is quantities like latitude and longitude, and you can see that those have the little globe next to them. So usually if you name columns latitude and longitude, Tableau knows that those are geographic or geometric quantities that it can use for mapping. So here I just put longitude and latitude up in the columns and rows. The other way you can do that is just take this geometry and drop it onto the map, and that will populate the map. So just for fun, let's go do that. So here's a blank one. I just created a sheet 1 that has nothing on there. I'm going to do what I just said. So drop that over here on the map. You can see that that just places it on the map. It's nice because it already has a base map underlying it. You can see it's crediting OpenStreetMap. So it knows that that's map data. It goes ahead and does that for you. It's pretty boring at the moment because there's no quantities associated with it. So you can do things like drop in values of interest to color it, to add details to it, different sizes if these are points. So if I put latitude, longitude points, clearly those could have sizes associated with how many I collected or what the infection rate was or anything like that. So I can drop that onto size. So the way these typically work, let's go back to Mosquito pools for the moment, is that if I wanted to take values, so this is the subdivision, so that doesn't have the values I'm interested in. I'm going to click here and switch my data source. And you'll notice now that the dimensions and the measures just changed. So those are changing over to my surveillance data now. Those also have latitude and longitude in them, but they don't have a geometry. So one thing to know if you're dealing with spatial data is at the moment, Tableau doesn't have the ability to recognize geometries straight out of our database, even though our database has that capability. So I know that seems like a tedious technical detail potentially if you haven't done a lot of GIS, but right now Tableau doesn't have the ability to directly read that stuff.
I'm gonna fix that. We can make it so you can get it right out of our database like that. So I'm gonna work on that real soon.
Yeah, Chris and Jody, I was gonna ask, you can't join spatial data using web, so you use desktop to author this?
Well, so you're correct. You cannot do spatial joins on the web, but I use sub-county here as a name, so it's actually joining on the name.
Okay.
So because it knows these names, which I used as labels here, so it matches the data which have sub-county in them. So Jody has put that with the export. So if you scroll down here, this sub-county that comes out with your data also matches up with the sub-counties that are the names in this file.
Right.
So
but that link is automatically generated. So if the data isn't really good, it doesn't work on the web. You've got to use desktop to fix it.
Exactly. That's a definite area where it's better to have desktop. You can do lots more powerful things there and then publish it to your Tableau server instance. So I think if it's me, again, this is not a sales pitch, although it sounds like one. I would definitely get at least one copy of desktop for someone in my agency to have that capability for creating things, and you get so much more customization ability. It's funny because the Tableau sales reps will tell you that server can do a lot, and they're right. And the worlds have merged a bit where server can do a lot more than it once could, even 2 or 3 years ago, but it's still not there. Desktop still gives you all these different options for linking data. And as Dan's pointing out, if you've got points, for example, that are at known latitudes and longitudes, and you want to spatially join it, not by name, but based on the locations, you can do that in desktop. You can actually have these county subdivisions know what points are within them and link those based on spatial location. So that's a very powerful GIS tool that is possible, just not on the server alone. Okay, and then beyond that, the next thing would be to give it a color, give it something informative. So here I've just done that by summing the num count, which let's go back to the pools and just show you what that looks like. So within these pools and pool test results, these are linked tables. You look down here at the bottom tabs, and the first tab is really important. So that's where you define these data sources. It's looking like I've already defined all this, which I have, but that's important to do that, to have everything linked appropriately. If I go back to that step, this shows you how Mosquito pools are created. So I have the pool information, which is the basic information about the pool, but it doesn't have the test result. And then I have the pool test result, which tells you what results came from those pools. And the next thing I have to do is database style, I have to link those. So if I drop these on, Tableau tries to make a good guess as to how to join those. So you'll see that it just populates this join. If I want to see what it is, I can mouse over it. So here you can see it's doing an inner join, which means it keeps only the values that match in both tables. And it's joining pool to pool test result. And then it has pool ID equals pool ID, which makes sense, of course. So pool ID is present in both of those tables. That relates those in a unique way. So pool IDs only occur once in our database. So any pool ID that occurs in pool and relates to the same pool ID and test result can be assured that that's the same pool. If you want to see what that creates once you do the join, you can click Update Now. And that essentially creates this big, broad spreadsheet that has all of that information. So you can see just above each field name, it tells you what table those come from, and then it links all those up based on the pool ID. So you get all the information in both tables joined as one giant spreadsheet, essentially, so that you can filter, you can analyze any of those pieces of information. And then you of course can toggle over to the subdivisions too, and that's where that's a little more boring because that's just the shapefile information I uploaded, but that's what you get: sub-county, description, and the geometry, which is those polygons. All right, so once you've set that up and have your joins like we do for Mosquito pools there, then you can go use it, which is what we're doing in this sheet. So at this point, we've got the dimensions, which is all those groupings available in pool test result here. And then we've got all the measures. So these are the values that you might want to analyze out of that. You can see for this first spreadsheet, I'm of course grouping by sub-county. I also dropped sub-county a second time onto label. And so that has this little text icon here that tells me I dropped it on label. So that's what caused these labels to show up to tell me what sub-county it is. And then the most important piece is what the quantity is I want to analyze. So in this case, I took that num count from the pool table and I dropped that in for the color. So these are colored by num counts, and it's summing those for whatever groupings I applied. So it's taking for that sub-county whatever filters I applied on the right and just totaling those up, and then it'll give it a color accordingly. If you want to edit that color, then you can click on this, and there's lots of options there. For the interest of time, I won't go through all of them, but you can change your color gradient and all of those things anytime you want. Another thing you might want to look at is mosquito infection rates. So here I just did the minimum infection rate. And so to do that, I needed to create a calculated field. So I know the test results. Let me flip over to mosquito pools again. And so one trick you might need to do is convert some of our values in the output data to something more useful for analysis. So a good example is the test results. The test results don't come out as yes, no, or 0, 1 variables that you can just add up. They instead come out with things like confirmed. So if a pool is positive for West Nile virus, what it's going to say is that it's confirmed for West Nile virus. That's not a number you can add up. So I created calculated fields for that. So the first one is positives. So I need to turn that test status here, which has an ABC text-based value, into something I can use for analysis. So here I went to create a calculated field. Let me edit that field, and that will show you what I did. All I wrote is a simple little if statement. So if test status equals confirmed, then 1, else 0. and. So all that does is give it a 1 if it's confirmed positive, 0 if it's not. Say okay. So now I could total those up to get the numbers of positives. If I want the number or the infection prevalence in the mosquitoes, which in this case is the MIR or minimum infection rate, I can go here and create another calculated field, which I did. And so here I'm going to total up the positives. So I'm doing an aggregate function to sum all positives, again, based on my calculated field, divided by the sum of the num count, which is the total number of mosquitoes I tested, and then multiply that by 1,000. So that'll give me the minimum infection rate per 1,000, which is one of our usual quantities we use for figuring out how much West Nile activity is in a given area. You could imagine you could also link in collection data and calculate a vector index very similarly. So let's say okay, and that's what I did. So then I dropped that onto the color. So that's how you would create that. Let me just take it out for the moment. So I'm going to take that color away. You see it goes back to the uniform color. This is all I did. I take that calculated MIR field. I'm going to drop it onto color. And you can see that it just has some sort of aggregate of MIR. So for MIR, let's just mouse over. So now we get quick views based on all our filters here. So here I've filtered to Tarsalis. I filtered only to year 2018. If I want to see 2019, quickly do a switch. You can see it's populating the table with completely different values for 2019. This is only for July and August. So it's a quick way to go through and see what years were different. You can mouse over and see for each sub-county what the MIR was in those different areas. So 2019 was a very low year, as you can see. We get 1.4, 2.3. If you check more than one, you're just getting a total over all of those. So here we've got 9.78, 18.35, much higher values in 2018 than 2019. So that's the kind of information you can get from these. And I think with that, I will hand it off to colleagues in mosquito control. So we've got multiple agencies involved today. And unlike me, these are more power users who know much more about how to interact with data. So first up, we have Kim Hung from Coachella Valley Mosquito and Vector Control District. And we had a few conflicts with timing, so some are pre-recorded and others are not. Let's start with Kim's video. These are relatively short, 5 to 10 minute videos. And so we'll have Kim Hung from Coachella Valley Mosquito and Vector Control District, then Mary Sorensen from Placer Mosquito and Vector Control District, Dan Fisher from Sacramento Yolo Mosquito and Vector Control District, and then Peter Von Crude from Shasta Mosquito and Vector Control District. So we'll have 4 use cases, all of which are a little bit different. I think it'll give you a good overview of how districts use these data in ways that we can't provide. So after that, if any other folks on the line would like to give other input or show your own use cases, we can do that as well. So let me go to Kim by video.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kim Hung, vector ecologist from Coachella Valley Mosquito Vector Control District. Thank you, Chris Barker, for inviting me to share a few things that I like to do with Tableau. This is a pre-recording, so if you have any questions for me after this presentation, please email me at khung@cvmvcd.org. First thing I'd like to share with you is the 80s report. This is a report that I put together a while back to send to the district around the time when Aedes aegypti was first found. This is a report that I still do now, and I'm currently trying to figure out a way to improve it and make it more relevant. Back when we first started this report, it was very difficult to keep track of all the new detections we were finding. So this is a digestible summary breaking down our findings by city for the week and breaking it down by trap type. So we have a graph here showing the total Aedes aegypti collected, broken down by the city, and then also by trap type in numbers of traps that we had that were positive, as well as the total number of mosquitoes. There's also a time span looking at the Aedes collected over the last 12 months. And what's nice about this is that I don't have to download and export the data every week to generate these tables and graphs. I can simply refresh the week that I want to look at. So let's look at week 21, which was last week. And the data will automatically update, and I don't have to start over with the data manipulation every single time. Normally what I do is I download as a PDF, which is this feature here, and then I send that as an attachment in an email to the district. The other thing I'd like to share with you is the capabilities to use the data for quick analysis. Again, instead of downloading everything to Excel using the data export feature on VectorServe, Tableau makes it very easy to create tables and gives you a few options for visually making the numbers stand out, like I did here. So I use this table to help me answer the question, are our CO2 traps doing well in our urban zones? A little bit of background, normally we use gravid traps to collect our Cuenca fasciatus mosquitoes in our urban areas, but a few years back we added CO2 traps to our site to improve trap catches. What I wanted to know was if it's worth keeping the CO2 traps at these sites. And this table gives a nice overview of what we've been collecting for the last several years, week over week. I have it broken down by CO2 trap and by gravid trap collections, and we can see whether or not the CO2 traps were collecting as many or more mosquitoes than the gravid traps. The other thing I was also looking at was whether we were getting positive mosquito pools from the CO2 traps, and for site 208 in the CO2 traps we were, which clearly says to me that maybe we want to keep the CO2 trap at this site. So these are a couple of things that I use Tableau for my work. I use it to create a visually digestible summary report that I send out to the district on a weekly basis. And it's something easy to update every week, and I don't need to re-download the data. The other thing I do is I can use it to look at the historical collection and pool sample information, and it helps me make decisions about our surveillance program. And this makes the unwieldy years of data easier to manipulate and work with. Thank you for your time. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me.
All right, thank you very much, Kim. And I'm not sure if you're on the call today, but certainly appreciate Kim and all of our speakers today providing these use cases. Next up, we have Mary Sorensen from Placer Mosquito and Vector Control District, and she will provide an overview of their district's use of Tableau.
Hi, this is Mary Sorensen with Placer Mosquito and Vector Control, and I'm going to show you a few of the reports that we've made using Visual Gateway and Tableau. So I'm going to go into presentation mode here, and I'm on Tableau Desktop right now. But these same reports have been published to Tableau server as well, so you can view them from a website. So I'm going to go over here to my tab called Abundance Graph. This is super simple. This is just the number of mosquitoes, female mosquitoes per trap night over different disease weeks for different years. So I have the only kind of fancy thing I put in here was a 5-year average. This is very similar to one of the graphs that's available on the Gateway report itself. And then I have the other years individually. Something cool here is that you can click the year that you're interested in, and over here on the legend you can click the year that you're interested in and it will sort of highlight that. So if I go to 2019, it stands out against the others. And then another really cool feature in Tableau is that if you see something you're interested in and you want to learn more about it, it's interactive. So for example, right here, there's this unusual spike of abundance. So I might want to find out more about that. So if I click here and go to the lines, I can see more here. And then if I click full data, I get a lot more. So what I usually do is I go over here to females per trap night, and I can click to sort that column, and I can see that probably that average is mostly driven by this one number. So now I'm interested in this. I want to see what are these 1,500 mosquitoes in this unusual week. So if I scroll over here, I can see that those are Aedes and Crepitus. And if I keep going, I can see they're at a source called Quartzite Circle, which I happen to know where that is. So yeah, I remember that from last year. That's useful. I can also select my species over here. So if I'm not interested in all these others, I just want to see my Tarsalis abundance, I can click to see that. So It's a good example of a report that's a little bit more interactive, and you can sort of play with it in real time and have it change and show you different things. Data exploration. So I'll go to the next one. This is personally one of my favorite ways to look at surveillance data is on this map with these little pie charts. So each location that's trapped has a pie chart. And here, let me go to a different week to show you. Let's do a different one. And the pie chart, the colors show the different species. So I have these grouped into just our biggest species of interest, and then everything else is red for other. So this brown here is Aedes syrensis, and the red is other, which I happen to know is mostly Aedes and Npdes. And you can click through these by week to sort of see your seasonal change. We have a lot of seasonal change in our district. Kind of start out with our spring species like treehole and Aedes and Npdes, and then we go into our pipiens and tarsalis in the summer, and sometimes we get a little bit of floodwater Aedes like Aedes melanimum in the fall. So it's kind of fun to see that over the year. And with this Tableau report, another thing that we can do is turn it into an animation. So if I click this play button here, it will scroll through the weeks and you can see things changing over time. So this is for 2020, so we're having low abundance. We're still early in the year. But you can see it start to grow. And you can also see how we start trapping different locations. Our agency has started doing year-round trapping, but it's only later in the year that we trap more sites. So you can see more sites. So it stopped on week 22, which is the latest data that's available. And again, you can kind of highlight these. You can see this particular site had Culex tarsalis, Freeburni, melanimum, and other. And again, if you want to see more about that, you can click through to get the details. So in this case, our other is Aedes vexans mostly. Okay, and then let's see, we can go through to the next one, West Nile virus map. This one shows the West Nile virus detections by week. There's no 2020 here since we haven't had any yet this year, but for example, if we go to 2019, week 33, each of these dots is a positive West Nile virus mosquito test. And then this is a bigger dot because there are actually 3 positive pools at that location for this week. And then down here, there's one with 2. And if I click through here, we can see the change over the weeks. Sort of starting to be less virus. And then week 42 is the last week that has virus for 2019. And then the last one I want to show you is this report for species. So this one was kind of developed to look at trends over time for different species. So over here on the left, if I click on Aedes melanimum, and I mentioned earlier that we get a lot of those in the fall. And this is kind of just one way to look at that. So 2016 through 19, I can add 2020 on here. We can look at when we detected the Aedes melanimum. And if we click through, we can see our Aedes syrensis tends to be earlier, but this is an example of something that's interesting. I think a lot of us around here think of this as a spring species, but you can see that we continue to detect it throughout the year. This is probably partly because we have different climates at our different elevations in Placer County. And we do notice that as it gets hot in the lower elevations, we see more Aedes syrensis higher up in the foothills and in the mountains. Our anopheles, we definitely have that fall peak for our anopheles, pipiens, tarsalis. And you can completely remove those other species rather than highlighting them using these filters, and you can drill down to different years that you're particularly interested in. So again, I like these kinds of reports that are more interactive. You're encouraging the viewer to play with it and think and explore on their own. And that's really one of the benefits of Tableau. If you want to make a static report, it's easy to use Excel or some other software that gives you a flat, like a PDF type image, and then you can give that to the people you want to share your information with. But with Tableau, you can make these interactive reports that people can use to ask their own questions. So that's about it. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Mary. That was super useful, and I think you can see some of the power of Tableau just because it anticipates some of what your data will be, and you can drop things in. Next, we have Dan Fisher, who will be doing a live presentation from Saciolo. So Dan, I will stop my share, and you can start sharing when you're ready.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to get my sharing window going here. Just 1 minute, please. Okay, it says I'm sharing and it says I'm not muted, so hopefully you can hear me and see what I'm looking at. I was talking with Peter at Shasta to try to figure out who to place the blame about our use of Tableau with, and I think that we decided it's Joel at Placer. He was, I think, the first district in the state to purchase Tableau and get started trying to visualize his data. He actually did a couple presentations at MVCAC. I want to say this is like 4 years ago or more than that, about how he started to first look at his data and how that's helped him operationally. And so it's really great to see this spread, and other districts start to use it and start to really look at their data. You know, as we move onto more online systems and web-based systems and databases, we're collecting all this data, more and more and more data. But where does it go? How is it useful? How do you use it to answer new questions you might have? And we stumbled on Tableau because it was a really easy way to get started looking at stuff, and then the learning curve just jumps up tremendously with all these crazy power features. And so it's been very, very extendable, and we use it for a lot of stuff to just kind of take over the day-to-day. You know, Kim had a great example of, you know, here's this visualization that we used to do with Excel and pull in all this data every week, and now it just automatically updates. So that was a great example of the power of it. So I'm going to go over a couple things that most other presenters haven't talked about yet, just as an overview, and I'll try to keep it, I'll try to remind myself to talk a little slower, and I'll try to keep it on a higher level. But one thing I wanted to go over is that, you know, we publish a lot of our own data sources. So one of the really big advantages of Dart providing the Tableau server is that all of the gateway data is already live and ready for you to work with. So you can go in and look at your traps and look at things like that, and get started right away. And that's a really powerful integration that really was like a few multi-year project to do. So I really want to say a big thank you to Chris Barker and to Jody Simpson, and to all the other programmers working over there to keep this going and to make it as powerful as it is. One of the things you might not notice is when you're working with the data that's from CalServe, it's actually very fast. And the reason that's so fast is that they've created an aggregate database that summarizes all of our years and years of collection data into summaries. And so it makes it very fast to work with. So I really appreciate all the work that they've done. But one of the great things about Tableau Server is that you can upload your own data to it. So you're not just limited to what's provided by Gateway. So one of a few things that we've done is we've exported some of our map vision data to it. So we've got material extracts and some larval inspection data. We've even got, I think Chris showed our service request data on a previous visual workbook. But you can upload Excel, you can upload Microsoft Access, you can even upload KML. And so here's a quick KML layer that I uploaded, but I haven't done anything with it yet. So it's connected to this file I uploaded that's a KML file. It knows it's a spatial file. And just what's amazing to me is how fast Tableau has grown. You know, one of the great things is that we are really benefiting by Tableau's big user base. They have a huge user base in government and in healthcare and in all these huge corporations, and that's really their bread and butter, where they get all of their feature development. It funds all of this new features that we get to use, and I'll show some of those in a little bit. So I don't have a workbook here. One thing that they just added like a year ago is the ability to create a brand new workbook on the web with no desktop software. So here's the new workbook, and if I just literally double click this geometry measurement, it's going to map all of the geometry that was in that KML file that I uploaded. So here's all our district zones, which is different than the county areas that Chris was showing on the map earlier. These are actually our own control zones that we've drawn. But let's put some labels on those. So you just literally drag the name dimension onto label. And so you can see the numbers there, and let's make it a little prettier. So we'll drag also the name description onto color. So it's going to automatically color code a palette. And one of the things that we mentioned before you can't do is, if I've got my material database up here and I've got latitude, longitude points of where I've applied materials, I can't join those using the website. So I use our desktop program to join that data together. That way it can show me, hey, in zone 9, how much Vectovac did we use last June, or other zones. And we use a lot of this kind of analysis in ArcGIS to try to figure out, do we need to modify zone boundaries? Do we need to change staffing based on how many sites and how much acreage and how much material? We use ArcGIS for a lot of that stuff, but once we have a custom report in ArcGIS that we want to run over and over and over, that's where we move it to Tableau, because Tableau has those automatic updates with those connected data sources, and that's what really gives it the power. So just in a few minutes, you can start to do this, and I think we'll have some tutorials coming out as I figure this out for myself, how we can use it as well. But that just kind of talks about the power of data sources. Now, one of the other things that I want to talk about is really just what do we use it for the most? And so I mentioned that we export our map vision data to it, and the thing that we really use the most is material reports. And so here is our material reports, and you see I've got a bunch of tabular reports for charting, for tables of data. I've got a nice map there, and so we'll just go into one of these so you can see what it looks like. So here's material summary for last month, and you see we also have not just the trade name but the EPA registration number, and then it shows a calculated amount of how many per unit, and then a summation of acres and distinct count. And we use this to basically copy and paste data into our monthly pesticide report that goes to the county. So that helps us look up the number by trade name to make sure that the names are always sometimes a little bit similar. And Chris mentioned calculated fields. That's what we've done here, because a lot of the times this materials, they don't go out in pounds. They go out as ounces or as some kind of dilution with something else. And so we've actually got some other lists that will show you log of materials. So here's what the actual treatments look like, right? So here's 2 each of agnique or 0.184 ounces of Alcid P35. So we've got a calculation that goes through all of these and goes into a table that we've created to convert everything over to the actual full units for pounds and gallons. So we can automatically create our report. And I mentioned that this data is in what's called a hyper extract, which is Tableau's unique data file format, and it makes data extremely fast to work with. So this is the previous month, but this is what's called a relative date picker. So it's looking at relative dates, so the previous month, previous years to right now, and it shows you the date range right here. This is last month. If I click on year, all of a sudden, within about 2 seconds, it shows me all of the data for the previous year. So, for Alcid pellets, we used, 4,073 pounds last year, or mosquito fish, 3,769 pounds. Now, what about the last 3 years? How long would it take you to put that data together? About 3 seconds. So the power of extract data to be able to look at multiple months and years really, really quickly is just huge. couple of things I wanted to look at. We had some fish reports that we put together for who was using how much fish per day. And there were a bunch of different reports, so I just made a quick dashboard. A dashboard is when you can take multiple reports and smash them all together. So we've got a date picker, a fish usage per person, and then here's the month breakdown. So all of our fish reports are in one place. And then one last thing I wanted to mention was, we all do that Npdes report. So I've created that in Tableau as well. So here's the timestamp, the employee number, the latitude, longitude, and you'll notice that this material, Vectorback 12AS, we don't usually apply that straight up. So we actually broke down the ingredients per material for this report. And then you can pick your zone, your start date, you can exclude certain materials, and it's just always live and ready to run. A few other things that we've broken out to do is, I want to know at this one site, what did I do? So let's pick on a random number here. We'll pick on site 76. That's a golf course in Rancho Murrieta. I'm going to look at maybe previous year, and you'll see, we just put mosquito fish there, last 3 years, a lot of other stuff. Maybe let's pick a few more sites again. Like, for example, this one's our district office. A lot of roundup and some suspend. So it's really easy to answer the questions that you want using live data and then going back years as well. One thing that was they added in about 1.5 years ago that we're starting to kind of figure out how we can take advantage of is Tableau purchased a company that was working on something that they call natural language queries. So they built this into a feature they called Ask Data, and they market this as basically a way to Google your own data. So ask questions in a natural language. And so I'm going to type into the search bar, chart the number of dips for a city with year 2010 to 2020. And it goes and tries to figure out what I'm talking about. And it says, do you want a count of number of dips by city with date of 2020 as a bar chart? With year 2010 to 2020. Yeah, there it goes. It took a few seconds there. So I say, yes, show me that data. And it goes, here's your bar chart. And I didn't drag and drop anything. I didn't even know where this data was. I just literally typed in a question. And so now I can see that this data is actually from Lake County. I had an Access database I was using with them to answer some questions earlier. I can change it to a pie chart. And there's actually this by city. City is a spatial element. So it actually will show me with a map the count number of dips per city with that date range. So this natural language is really cool because you can expose this search field to people in your district that may not know how to build a graph, but they want to see, by city in 2013, distinct locations, or whatever you want to do. And it kind of comes up by date with 2013 years. Some of it's kind of a decent guess, but it's really quick to try something and then go back and change it. Try something else, go back and change it. So here's by location, by city, with date in 2013 as a bar chart. And I've got 838 distinct locations in the city of Middleton. So this is going to become a bigger and bigger thing. And I think it's going to be really powerful and really cool. A couple of the other interesting things that we're working on. And of course, I don't always have the time I want to go play with this stuff. We've got all of our existing kind of canned reports already set. Our supervisors run those as they need to. But just to show the power of some maps, to look at your data in a spatial way, but very simply. So this is just the distribution of the types of trap we have in our area. And this is 2017 data. We can add on other years or switch to different years to quickly see that. But one of the things you can do, which is kind of interesting, and it's something that takes a lot more work if you want to do it in ArcGIS, is you can actually put a bunch of maps on the same page to compare them. And it's really quick and easy to do that. So here's our positive pools from 2004, and I can scroll to the right and view over time as our total positive pool distribution changes on that map over time. So you can see that, you know, from 2011, it grew to 2013-14 were big, heavy years, maybe went down a little bit. 2016 was a big year and then it went down a little bit. You could chart this with a bar chart under here of average rainfall. That would be pretty interesting. But it's really cool to be able to compare all your data. And of course, as you hover over it, you can see, you know, there's the city of Dunnigan, there's the city of Elk Grove. You can click on one thing, just as Mary was talking about. So it's just really powerful to be able to get data together and view it in one place. It's fairly simple to start with, and as Chris was mentioning, we have canned reports that we started for people called report templates. So if you go into report templates, any of these are already using CalServe data, gateway data, and you can load them up with your own data immediately, or really explore anything you have access to on the site. So I'm happy to take any questions after the meeting. Email me. I hope that's provided a little bit of an overview of what we think is interesting and how we're using it. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Chris.
All right, thank you, Dan. Really great hybrid examples of how to use your own data with the gateway data, and lots of good stuff there. So really appreciate that. We'll move over to Peter Boncrude, and Peter has been jumping around to many different calls this morning, I think. So I see you online, Peter, and thank you for joining us. Take it away.
Okay, I will also try to screen share here. Is everybody seeing that? Let me see. I am sharing. So I'm sharing the right thing.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so I'm going to try not to go over exactly what everybody else went over. A couple different things I was going to show. Well, first, I'm going to make a pitch based on based on Dan showing his material and treatment information. If you put all your data into CalServe, you can actually have all that data accessible as well. You wouldn't have to even tap into your external database, and you could file your CalAg permit report through Gateway as well. So get your treatment data into Gateway. So you've been admonished, Dan. So I'm going to look a little bit at what you can have, what you can build. I have Tableau Desktop. I create a lot in Tableau Desktop. I have a lot that isn't actually published. So what I wanted to do was show what you can do on Tableau Server Online, and you can create without necessarily having Tableau Desktop. So for those of you that may not have access to that, or you're in an agency where you have one or two licenses that do offer desktop, there's still a lot you can do. So the first thing I'm going to show is just a general treatment report. So we do put all of our application data into the Gateway system. And so within 5 minutes, I was able to really quickly roll up so a nice dashboard, which, as Dan mentioned, is kind of a grouping of different worksheets. As Mary mentioned, you can also look in at each little piece, but what you're looking at here is larvicide by material, adulticide by material, and then our mosquito fish plantings. You can then change the time, and you can look at the different, how that changes or progresses over time. I also added a size for the number of applications that were made. So if you want to see if you're consistently treating in the same areas year in and year out, you can look at that. So that's one, it literally took me, I don't know, probably 5 to 10 minutes to put this together with the different worksheet creations and then putting them together on the dashboard. Another dashboard that I really quickly put together is this one. So not as map-based, but a bit more clean in terms of reporting data out. If you're putting together a board packet or something that you wanted to send to your trustees or the public. So again, we're looking at treatments by the amount of times that you're treating, You have your date selector here, so you can look at any period of time that you want to look at. So if you're only going to look at a month, you have that ability. It also will then sort by purpose, so adulticide, herbicide, larvicide, and then also give you your pie chart. So all three of these are linked by that one date selector. So a real easy way, a real clean way to provide information, pretty high level, but again, you can always dive into these numbers to get more information about what they mean and what the specific applications are. And this is even on the server version. And then you can even export all of that to Excel or to whatever else you want for more processing. So here's all the data that's creating that number. So I have all my applications, I have my application locations, I have the quantity amounts and everything associated with that. So even though it looks really simple, you can get pretty detailed pretty quickly. The other piece I was going to show is is a service request piece. So similar to what Dan's done is we connected our MySQL database, which is our in-house data collection server, to CalServe or VectorServe, and we can then create reports up into that are available through the Server Online component. Again, this was all created through Server Online, so I didn't use the Tableau Desktop feature at all. And so once we made the connection to the server, you can have people that have that license, create reports as they see fit. So what you're seeing is service requests by zip code, which is a pretty slick little feature that they do, similar to what Dan has showed with his zones, and also what Chris has shown with the sub-counties. And then you're looking at the number of service requests over time in comparison to last year. You can go and look at more years than that if you want. It starts to make things look a little cloudy, but real quickly we can see what years we had a lot of service requests, what years we did not, and when those peaks occurred. And all you're doing is adjusting this little date selector that again adjusts everything. And then down here you're seeing basically a table of by city the different service requests, and then again the different peak times that those service requests occurred. So this one also was real quick for me to put together. Once you make that connection, I will say that's probably the most challenging piece, is the data cleanup at the initial component. The initial start of all your projects is just making sure that the data is in a format that's easy for Tableau to work with it. Then once that's done, it's really easy to ask Tableau a variety of different questions really on the fly. So that's the service request connecting to another database. And then the last one I wanted to show, this one I did actually build a while ago on the desktop version. But what I wanted to show with this was the different maps. So there's only one base map background on Server Online, but you can, with desktop, you can upload a variety of different map service backgrounds. There's actually, they've upped their game in terms of geospatial data. So there used to only be 2 base map available on the system. Now I think there's like 6. Plus you can link to any of the open source web map servers that are out there. There's a couple good ones, and I have some good links if anybody's interested in that. And it's a nice way, I think, to make those reports pop, and also kind of just visually make it a little more interesting than this kind of grayed out background. But we've been really happy with how we're able to connect to our data. And as Dan's mentioned and a couple others, throwing disparate data sources together into one place can be a real powerful tool, because you can start to see things that you might not see with all those resources being isolated or siloed in their own areas. So I think we're close to the ending of the time. So I'm trying to go fast and save time for any questions. So I'll stop there, and if there's any questions about what I have, you can either ask at the end, or you can email or call me later. That's all I got, Chris.
Okay, so for Peter, thank you. First of all, this was really great, and you're giving use cases that we can't possibly, so we really appreciate that. Another question is, a lot of agencies wonder how many licenses they really need, and clearly there are differences in sizes of agencies, but what would be a recommendation for a typical starting point? Is it buy one license, desktop and server, or is something else?
In my opinion, if you're just getting started, I would definitely get the desktop and online component. I think there's value because you can share the online component with other people. I think if you're going to be doing anything with these reports, you've already mentioned it, you really do need a desktop version, at least one within the agency. You know, we have one desktop version and then 3 online versions. We have one available for operations, one available for the lab, and then one connected to the desktop version. And that seems to work out. We might branch out a bit more. We're kind of pivoting our reporting because we just rolled out a new data collection system in the last month and a half, and it's going to weigh quite a bit more on a reporting end toward Tableau and the gateway than our old data collection system did. So we're moving away from canned reports and we're moving toward that. So if that requires more access, we could definitely spin up a few more licenses in that regard if we're starting to see issues with access. But you know, we're a small-ish district, small medium district, and we so far haven't had any issues with the 3 online server licenses and the 1 desktop license.
Okay, that sounds great. That helps us have an answer for those interested. And we will be reaching out to all of you shortly just to know how many people are interested for next fiscal year and having a license. One quick thing to mention, so I'm going to share my screen once more and hide Zoom. All right, so we've shown a lot of different reports and other options today. If you want to use one that's already there, so long as the owner of it has given permission, you can click this little ellipsis, the 3 dots associated with that report. If I click Edit Workbook in this case, here's one Dan has created under Report Templates as he described. If I click Edit Workbook, that takes me into that workbook, just as Dan had saved it. And at that point, I can interact with it. It's starting with Dan's template. When I'm ready to save it in my own world, like I want to make it my own at that point, I can click Save As, and then it's going to ask me where I'd like to save it. And the folders to which my user has access are shown in dark color, and then there's other folders, but you can't save to other agencies' folders. So here, for example, I could save to default and just say Workbook 1. And click Save, and at that point, that's my own. So that's going to give me the opportunity to make that my own. It doesn't take away from anything Dan has done, and he still owns his, but I've used his as a starting point for my own. You can see there's also that capability of embedding the password for the data source. Only do that if you want the other users to be able to go in and utilize those data. All right, so I won't do that for now. Another thing just to know, I'm going to close out. So if you want to set permissions, let's say for my content, let's see, my account settings, maybe that. Yeah, here we go. So under settings, you can see you can save credentials to other web-based data services. So here's like Google Drive, for example. If you have some CSVs or other data sources on Google Drive, you can actually save your credentials for that. So Tableau can connect to these things that are already web-based. But talking about permissions, for example, if I go over here and then go to permissions for any of my data sources, my views, my workbooks, anything I've created, I can go in and see who has access to that. So this is an example of all users having view access. They've got ability to connect to that data source for their own purposes, and they've got save access, so they can use it, but they can't modify it. So they can't download it in this case, they can't delete it, they can't set the permissions for other users. If you want to change that, then this is the default, having all users, but you can also add some sort of permission for another group. So here's all the different user permissions here. Some of them are inherited from different sources. So just to let you know, for any piece of information you create on Tableau, whether it's a data source or a workbook, you can go in and modify these and add different pieces. So let me just do one. So I'm going to say I want to give Alameda County some access. I can go here and make them either a connector, which just means, hey, you can connect to it, you can use it, you can see it. If you want to be able to edit it, you add editor. And if you want no access, then you can block people. That doesn't happen so often, but you could. And then denied just means nothing. So, I mean, they won't even be able to see it exists, I guess, in that case. Once you click save, let me not do that to Alameda, our friends. Click save, and then that would give them view only access in that case, where they could see it, but they couldn't really use it for their own purposes in that case. All right, now let's see, what else do I have? I think we're getting close to the end. Oh, the final piece was just using other BI software. So Jody covered that pretty well. This is just a database connection. So Tableau server is really the environment that lets you see other people's content. So what lets you see all of this is the Tableau server environment, where the reports, the worksheets, everything everybody creates can be shared with other users of the Tableau server. That's unique to Tableau. Beyond that, all of this is just a connection to our database and any other data sources you link in. There is other software that does that. Jody mentioned Power BI. Google also has Data Studio, which is, I'd say, a little clunkier at the moment, but it does work to give you visualizations, and it's a free product from Google. So there are ways to hook that one into our database as well. One I just wanted to quickly mention is also QGIS, which is free GIS software. You can see here that QGIS acknowledges PostGIS as a data source. So that's essentially spatial data in our database. Jody, as mentioned earlier in the call, is working on ways to get all those geometries in our data that are visible to you. This will allow you to interact in gateway software with that. So all you would do is go in and, in this case, I'll just edit the existing connection I have. Just a second. Edit connection. So this is, again, same thing, db.vectorserve.org. Database is the gateway. You can do basic username, which in this case would be something like SEO and then the SEO password for the data. That warning is associated with QGIS, so don't worry about that. And then you would say, okay, so I would save this as a data source. And then in QGIS, for example, they have this database manager. And once I go to that, I've got options to add that information to my file. So here I could type, this is going to fail just because we don't have geometry columns, but we will soon. So just to show you how that would work, you would type your agency and password, click OK. And I said it would, yeah. So here's where it would fail in the database manager, because it's saying we don't have geometry columns. We know that, but once we add those, you'll actually be able to drop that in as layers on a map in GIS software if you need to do something that does not involve Tableau. So essentially anything that will connect to a Postgres, PostGIS database can be connected to our software.